name is Latanya Mapfret, and I'm the president and CEO of Global Fund for Women. Global Fund for Women, as some of you know, is a foundation and a nonprofit that supports women and women's movements around the world. We primarily work in the global south, and our effort is to try to get resources to women's movements as they need them, when they need them, and for the successes that they have determined for themselves. I'm a lawyer by profession, and so I came out of law school really to work on the human rights agenda writ large, but found that working on the women's rights and starting at the Beijing conference, quite frankly, in 1995, really set me on this path to really think about how I can do the best I can for the world. And I came to the conclusion, if we can get the rights of women prioritized and centered, then the world would be much better off. I started at the UN, at UNICEF, doing that work. I went on to work for USAID for a number of years and in a number of countries. And then I worked for Planned Parenthood when I did come home for a number of years in the reproductive rights movement. And now I'm at Global Fund for Women, very much focused on human rights again. You know, this conversation about feminism is great because I didn't just become a feminist. I was born a feminist. And I think if you're born and cultured to believe that women are equal to men, then you're a feminist. I don't know if it's any deeper than that, but I have seen all the sort of discussions around what that looks like and look forward to talking to Faith about what she thinks around feminism. But so I'll hand it over to you.
My name is Faith. I'm 25 years old. I'm a feminist born in Zambia. The first feminist I've ever known is my dad. He brought us, all of us, up in a way that we didn't have to feel that we couldn't do this because we're girls or only boys could do that. You talk about changing light bulbs, to painting the garage, to taking out the trash. I did all of that. Things that would otherwise be considered as, less feminine. As I, left the house, I realized that, actually, in other people's experiences, this is not a girl's thing to do. So my feminism has been framed around the way that I grew up. So my experience, I started a nonprofit when I was still in uni and in my undergrad. I was still a teenager. I started an organization called Copper Rose, and I serve as the chief operations officer. And Copper Rose the name is symbolic. We try to advocate for young women and girls' sexual reproductive health and rights, just as valuable as copper is to Zambia's economy, and as beautiful as a rose is. We see Zambian women and girls as copper rose. Because they're, a valuable resource which could, stand the test of time. Is it even more valuable than copper, in our opinion? Other than that, I also serve on the board of Resource Development Zambia and part of the governance team, as well as the finance team. And outside all of this work, I'm also passionate about seeing more opportunities for young women and girls in all different aspects.
That makes me laugh. 25 years ago, you were just being born. And for me, it was like almost the first assignment, I guess is maybe the best way of saying it, in my careers. I was so honored to be in that space. You just cannot imagine having that many women in one place. The feminine energy, let's just say, was over the top. And it felt really good to be able to come into this space. It was a very political event for many different reasons and for many different countries. But I would say that the arrival of the level of women who were at that conference, it says it all. But also, I go back and I ask people sometimes to read that declaration, the Beijing Declaration and Platform of Action. It's long, but it is so comprehensive. It is such a testament to just what women have been, thinking about and moving towards. And I think 25 years later, I'll say that I have not seen such a comprehensive document on women's development and empowerment, and some things that have happened over 25 years, like technology. And we could talk more about that. But to be honest, that platform is still very much relevant. We still have quite a ways to go. We have come far in 25 years, but the power dynamics, the justice issues are still very much a part of what we have to work on. I think one of the issues that I would say we also have to really focus on is, centering the most marginalized women, trans women, women of color, poor women, women that are differently abled. I still think their voices have not been brung from the margin into the center. And I think that's the work that we need to do. I think a part of that means, though, that we have to be very careful about speaking for certain groups and assuming that we understand what their agendas are because we're all women.
First of all, the Declaration is one of the most visionary and most powerful agendas in empowering women and girls everywhere. And the fact that 189 countries have signed onto this declaration, shows to say that they are interested in empowering women and girls. In terms of how I think it has shaped my work, and also in terms of how other young feminists have, taken this on and whether they understand, I would say it's complicated. And I would say it would be a yes and no question in the sense that have they really understood what, the agenda is? Do they really understand the declaration? And just as Latanya was saying, have they read the document? So they have, I would say yes, in the sense that they are holding governments accountable, through advocacy activities, through designing programs and activities which do empower women and girls in different ways, eradicating poverty, providing sexual reproductive health services to women who need them, also improving the quality of education and access to education, etc. But on the ground, how the national treaties on the ground really just translate into whether young women or young girls feel that their needs are being met, and not necessarily whether the wording in the document is, being fulfilled to the latter.
But Faith, just quickly, do you think that young women are being centered? Do you think their lives feel better at this point in our history?
There's much more support now than there was even just 5 years ago when I started out. I feel like a lot more people are realizing and recognizing that women and girls do get disadvantaged. And I think also the fact that we're a more connected world kind of makes it a little bit better. Of course, we can get into the argument about whether activism online is really activism offline and how we can, bring these two together. But I think we've made so much progress already, but there's still a lot more work to be done. I think what is missing is understanding our different, our positionality, and understanding how everybody can come to the table to work together to actually achieve, a generation equality. And that can only happen once we realize the power that we have and, realize our strengths as individuals.
Teach a course at Columbia University in the graduate program called Reproductive Justice Movement, Black Bodies in a Patriarchal Society. The purpose of this particular course was to actually understand that question. What has it meant for 9 Black women to stand up and say that the reproductive movement is not the same for them, and how they look at sort of the right to not have children is very much linked to the right to have children. And the history, particularly of these Black women in the United States, the history of being enslaved and not in control of their bodies really had to be taken into the context. And in addition to that, it's that if you do decide to have a child, then you have the right to keep and protect your children. And what all of these things meant for us was not centered in the arguments around birth control or the movements around abortion access. And so we wanted to talk about a much broader scope of what that meant. And as you know, Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined intersectionality some years before the Beijing conference, was really talking about that, right? It's that we didn't have the luxury as Black women in this country to really be very single issue focused, right? It was the same during the suffrage movement, right? It was, we still had these issues around the ways that we were being treated in this country. And so we couldn't just look at voting. We had to look at a whole, the lynching campaigns and all the other things that were happening related to the suffrage movement. And so I think it's been a continuation on that. And I worked for Planned Parenthood for a long time. And so I can tell you, in the most positive way, having the reproductive justice movement shape sexual and reproductive health and rights around not just our country, but as you know, it spread very quickly around the world as a focus, as a way to look at individual sort of interests that are sort of related to your reproductive health and rights, as opposed to just looking at a single issue. And I think it also allowed us to center women with different experiences in those conversations, as opposed to what might have been more of an academic or a theoretical conversation around these issues.
I think other priorities in terms of reproductive health would be around funding. We have, in my experience, and also with the other young people that I work with, we have a lot of knowledge and expertise about sexual reproductive health strategies that would work. I'll give you an example. In Zambia, our biggest challenge right now is teenage pregnancies. And there are multi-million-dollar projects that have gone into reducing teen pregnancies in so many different parts of the country. But for the last, I think 4 or 5 years, the percentages haven't been going down, and nobody is looking to invest in innovative programs, innovative projects, innovative ideas by young people who are closest to where these challenges are being experienced, and invest in those problems, invest in those solutions to be able to reduce the number of teenage pregnancies. I look forward to a time when there'll be no discrimination based on age. For example, not letting young people implement programs about reducing teenage pregnancies just because they are young, but then leveling the playing field and not allowing these, traditional mainstream solutions in terms of reducing reproductive issues. Instead, allowing new voices and younger voices to be able to influence the way that decisions are made.
I think we continue to look at women like Faith and, look at Amanda Gorman and, Malala and Greta, as unicorns, right? Like they're special, they're different, it's so amazing that we have Faith, to talk to when, there are thousands and thousands of Faiths and Malalas and Gretas and Amandas around the world. And I think we have to, not just women in the feminist movement, I think in general, we need to stop that kind of demarcation that, we feel like that one voice is all we need, and tokenizing that voice at the table. Because even within those voices, there's so much richness to be able to help us as we move towards a generation of equality. I think it's so important for when we have these conversations to be very careful not to tokenize the voices, being very careful to try some of the tactics and specific strategies that are coming out of our young feminists, and if they fail, they fail. We failed a lot. Right? By the time we got here, now it's their turn to be able to fail. And I think we have to be very conscious of how we do that.
Latanya, I was just going to add what you just said in terms of fear of failure. There's so many ways to meaningfully engage with young people. So many. Riskless has, tangible projects that have shown how to meaningfully engage young people that I have also participated in. In my own words, I would say that one of the biggest things that people are afraid of in terms of meaningfully engaging with young people, meaningfully letting young people lead these conversations, getting, their perspectives and not being afraid to let them run the show, I think is because people are kind of used to the cliche, they're used to the way things have been. Yeah, you go to this conference, spend X days there, come back, have all these long discussions, have 2 or 3 young people at the table making this, told that they're making decisions or that they're influencing the way that this paper is being written. But in the actual sense, the people who are going to get all of these ideas that young people have brought together will not involve them. They will leave them out of the emails. They will not show them the final document. You can't even spot what your suggestions are and where they are and how that document, you can use that document to then channel it into, other young people where you're coming from and, the grassroots communities. I think this is what, feminists like myself, young people like myself are looking forward to. We're looking forward to not just being the ones who are able to be on these calls. We want other young people to know that the work that they're doing in their capacity is being felt and is bringing about real change.
It's like, listen, don't make the assumption that you know what young people want, I think for all our sectors, not just sexual and reproductive health, but, education, economic justice, climate justice, we have to be much more thoughtful about how we hear what, especially everyday young people are dealing with and how we get to that, because getting to that is like bringing them from the margins to the center is how we get to some of the solutions that we're looking for.
One thing that I've seen that has been coming up is, this online mobilization. I mean, of course, COVID has encouraged this kind of mobilization. And it's mostly because people feel that they can easily express themselves on the internet. Of course, that's arguable based on where you're coming from and what the cyber laws are. But people feel that they can express themselves and how they feel or how they've, experienced any injustice online. And with the pandemic and lockdown, what I've also noticed emerging, especially in some of the Zambian communities, is how a lot of young people are very free to organize online, talk about the issues, the big challenges, open up Facebook groups, closed groups, open groups, handles and movements online, but are afraid to actually come out in the open. And most of this fear, it's not premeditated fear. I think it's fear because the online can sometimes feel like a space where you don't know what your audience looks like. But once you're actually, marching on the streets, trying to get people to listen to what you have to say and what you're advocating for, it's a bit different in the sense that there's the police. We've been experiencing a lot of police brutality, young people trying to advocate and demonstrate because of having peaceful demonstrations and peaceful march pasts haven't really ended up being peaceful because young people feel like they're being silenced. And young people are the huge part of the population. We make up a huge part of the population. And once you see this huge part of the population standing up against what they have been seeing as injustices, I'm finding that people feel a little bit threatened by that. And it's a dangerous time to live like that, because I feel that it's very difficult to then express and effectively advocate for things to change if we could have more healthy conversations, more healthy intergenerational conversations. I think that would be one of the best ways that we could have more meaningful and more effective activism.
There's been lots of research showing the benefit of social movements, even the DNA and how you support social movements, how you fuel like this rising people power globally. But we do know that when we say people power, that most, social justice movements, and in particular, the larger ones, are made up of young, bold activists. I mean, it's a time when young people are coming into an understanding of what injustices exist. And so naturally, they are the most, I would say, bold and forward in the social justice movement work that we're talking about. And so centering young people in those movements and preparing and protecting young people who are moving into that space has got to be really crucial for us. If we recognize that sustainable long-term change is only going to happen through movements, we have to be involved in technology. We have been watching the unprecedented levels of online harassment. I think that's what you were getting at, Faith. It is being able to really ensure that people are protected and their voices are heard online and offline. And so in that online space, we have all these cyber attacks happening, digital surveillance by governments of women human rights defenders, things that are just unconscionable and censoring their words. If we think we're going to be a society where gender justice, racial justice, climate justice, environmental justice, all of these things are part of our lives, then we can't allow this to happen online in the same way that we wouldn't allow it to happen offline.
We take for granted that people know what feminism is. People think that they do, but in actual sense, they don't. And especially in Zambia, people think feminism is this negative thing. It's like anti anti-male, anti-men. And what we're really excited about this project is because we're going to be training gender equality champions who will not only act as activists and advocates for feminism, but in their leadership, they'll be able to train others and build capacity of other young people to be able to understand what feminism is and to be able to speak from a point of knowledge and not from a point of assumptions. Because once you're speaking from a point of knowledge, you are able to make more knowledgeable decisions and you are able to make non-biased remarks.
So I'm excited about the opportunity to get just everyday activists centered in the work that we're doing. There are some amazing champions, and I don't mean the ones that go on to become president or vice president, in our case, yay. But I'm talking about just everyday women who are just breaking their backs to make sure that they're in service to their communities and that social and cultural issues that should not exist are going away. So I am super happy that we're starting to recognize that work. We're starting to lift that kind of work up. And so one of the projects that we're super excited about is a partnership with Me Too. So some of you know Tarana Burks, who started Me Too, but after she started it, which was a very grassroots-based organization, it kind of went grass tops, right? So it caught on, which is wonderful, but in many people's eyes, it became just a hashtag that grass tops women used in many different countries, not just the US, to be able to call out particularly men who have been doing sexual aggressions over the years. And it really helped because it really called out these individuals. It made the issue of gender-based violence much more profound, I believe, in our country, in the US, but across the world. But now I think in an effort to try to reclaim the grassroots start of that work, we're going to be in partnership with Tarana Burke and Me Too to try to really introduce the two to each other. So people who have been doing work in India around gender-based violence and those using the Me Too hashtag, bring it together. So bring the grass tops work and the grassroots work together in a way where it moves the issues at all levels, not just for people who have wealth and can afford to take people to court and who will be listened to when they say things, but also to the women who are every day experiencing this kind of violence, either in their homes, on the streets, or at their workplaces. And so that we have a much stronger social justice connection and not allowing people to sort of segment these into class issues, right? We want to be able to bring these movements together, to bring these voices together, not in a formal UN way where the president shows up and gets the best, class president they can, but I mean, everyday women talking to each other. And so that's what we're excited about at Global Fund for Women.
Tanya, I just wanted to say, I really like that you said it's going to be in a very informal way, because I feel like sometimes formalizing, these conversations and these discussions is exactly what takes away from, understanding and picking up the lessons from what two different groups are doing from two different parts of the world. And I'm one person who's learned from so many different groups who are trying to solve challenges that we've also faced. I've seen the power of, collaboration and not necessarily working in silos, because I don't think there's a challenge that has not ever been thought about. A solution has not ever been thought about because most of the challenges that we face are global challenges. So that's exciting. And yeah, looking forward to learning more and watching from afar. Say that intergenerational work requires time and patience. By patience, I mean patience both ways, both from younger people as well as older people. And don't get me wrong when I say patience, meaning that there's no agency. No, from my experience, I've seen that certain things tend to progress better when time has elapsed. I'll give you an example. When I started Couple Rose, I was 19. And at the time, I was still in my undergraduate degree program. And right after I finished, I was doing all this grassroots work. I think at the time when I was finishing, I think I should have done maybe 2 years of corporate grassroots organizing. And then I felt that, okay, all of this work we've done in the grassroots space needs to be taken somewhere. We need to be having conversations with policymakers, and we need to be having conversations with people who can actually implement the strategies that we're putting together. So me and my team started joining technical working group meetings, national technical working group meetings, where different conversations are had about different issues. And in particular, I joined the sexual reproductive technical working group meeting, and I would join the meetings which specifically talked about family planning and menstrual hygiene management, basically WASH related conversations. And I was going in those meetings. I had just finished my degree. I was studying business administration, so business background, but passionate about sexual reproductive health. And I would go into those meetings to talk to people about different issues. These used to happen monthly. With all of this powerful grassroots experience I had, I would sit in those meetings and I would hear all of this jargon, these acronyms being used, different types of acronyms to mean different types of things. And at the time, I would normally just take them down and write them down and maybe ask somebody to translate. I would say I stuck it out because I felt that I would eventually learn and I would eventually catch up. And my biggest advice would then be, in this case, to stick it out, but do not be afraid to ask. Do not be afraid to be in the room and interrupt the speaker, excuse me, can you please explain this? What does this mean? Because the people in that room at the time were technical experts. These are people with medical backgrounds, medical doctors, public health specialists, etc. But because I knew what was happening on the ground, I was an expert too, hey? I was a grassroots expert and I didn't exclude myself. And I think that's the biggest advice I would give. Do not exclude yourself, be patient, and don't be afraid to ask. The second thing also I would say is in terms of power sharing. I think we shouldn't take things too personal. I feel like sometimes we tend to take things personal. Young feminists take things personal. Senior feminists take things personal. They feel like, oh, wow, how come I didn't think of this when I was younger? Or, oh, I can't wait until I'm older and I can be able to do this. I think that there's so much that we can learn from where we're at, and there's so much we can do and we can provide from where we're at. I think with feminism, there's no age and there's no gender. Anybody can be a feminist. And I feel like people need to own it for us to be able to work intergenerationally successfully.
When I think about more senior feminists who are out there doing this work, what I would say in response to the advice that Faith has given to her younger colleagues is that you make space for those voices. And again, not in a tokenistic way, but if you're making a decision about any of the work that we're doing, I can't think of one single issue, not even geriatric issues that don't involve young people, right? That don't fundamentally involve the way that they're going to have to behave. You should not be making those decisions without their advice. And so there's so many different ways that you can do that. I mean, first of all, if you're looking around your leadership table and you don't see any young people, then you have a problem. There are a number of ways that you can go about doing this. But I think the advice that I would say is that you should not be making any decisions that affect young people without them there at the table.